clear blue skies. Not again. I'm going to show you something different. I was digging through my archive footage, the Denver Storm Chase Convention of 2017. I'm going to show you about 1 or 2 minutes of this.
Got the icebreaker going on here.
I don't know if you've ever been to one of these conventions or conferences. Even if it's not the Chaser convention, if it's Skywarn or something like that, they're always similar to this, and they're a lot of fun. 2017 was kind of memorable. You can see a presentation right there. You can learn a bit about meteorology. Yeah, there's Roger Hill. And there's often fun stuff. There's Tim Marshall dressed up as the Tin Man.
Nice.
That was pretty memorable.
That's the low of the surface. Look at the difference. Far better. You see some of the indices starting to kick in even though it's morning. But when you see up there in the upper right, that's a hodograph.
And there's a presentation by Jason Persoff. Always interesting. And it was always fun to get out and explore the surrounding area, especially in February. Some of you may remember we did a webcast live from this location. I think I was out in the parking lot. Some of the old-timers on Forecast Lab probably remember that. And there's some scenery around Mount Princeton. It was kind of cold, but went out hiking a little bit and got some of this footage. And of course, we also hit Royal Gorge Bridge. You can see a little bit of the vibration here in the strong winds. Anyway, that's probably a good stopping point. We'll close that off with some spectacular orographic clouds around Alamosa, looking out to the east there around sunset. We did go back out there to Denver once more in 2019 for the final Chasercon, and maybe sometime I'll show you some footage from that. Let's take a look at the surface map for this afternoon. It is getting active in the Pacific Northwest. Cold front moving through Boise and through Reno. Back behind it, some very cold air with significant depth and a lot of precip starting to develop near that front. Even though we've got a continental tropical air mass, kind of a dry interior air mass, we have elevated showers and storms due to the presence of an inverted V profile. In other words, we have humid air in the mid-levels and very dry air near the surface, and that's conducive to strong winds. Elsewhere around the country, temperatures coming up, 103 in the Texas Panhandle, and we've been discussing that for the past week, that ridge starting to move out into the Central Rockies and the plains of Colorado. And you can see the higher thickness values focused right there around Alamosa, which we just saw in the video, and up towards the Breckenridge area. In the northern plains, we have this warm front moving through the Minneapolis area, and further out east, this departing cold air mass in the wake of Hurricane Larry. Speaking of hurricanes, let's take a look down to the south. We've got Olaf, a tropical storm grazing the Baja Peninsula. And out to the east, we've got Hurricane Larry, still a hurricane, and you can see that the thickness gradient is still focused up to the northwest of the storm. Very few of those thickness contours coming through the storm, indicating that it is still warm core. And you can see one concentric thickness line right there. So yeah, we've probably still got a hurricane at this point, but it should transition pretty soon. It is heading up for Newfoundland. We've got hurricane warnings in effect for St. John and other parts of the eastern island. Further up to the northwest in Alaska and the Pacific, it is still, it's still looking cool, almost winter-like. That is an occlusion coming onshore. Very little reflection at the surface, but we do see a precip shield with that. And then further up to the north, Alaska picking up a little bit of rain with a system coming through Nome and McGrath and up to Siberia, a little bit of snow showing up at the top. And then out east, it does look interesting. There's a better look at Newfoundland. You can see they're in that warm sector with 70s and some very high dew points. Look at that, 66. No wonder that hurricane is keeping its strength. A cooler system moving through Churchill, 64 degrees right there, but cold air wrapping around the backside into northern Manitoba. And if we take a look further up north, we get into some cooler air up here in the high Arctic, 27 at Resolute, 32 at Cambridge Bay, and it's just cold up there with the thicknesses indicating very deep cold air all the way out to the Labrador Sea. Where, oh where, are we getting the heat today? Let's take a look. These are the official Weather Service forecast highs. And it's hot. 103 at Scottsbluff, 105 up there in northwestern Kansas, and 103 at Borger. And a lot of these, in fact, all of these red numbers are exceeding the record for the date. And a couple records also being tied further out to the west at Salt Lake City and Grand Junction. Here's how things look for tomorrow. The heat rolling out onto the Central Plains, 102 at Dodge City, tying the record for the date. Same thing at Goodland. And we're exceeding records for the date everywhere from Denver and Cheyenne down to Amarillo and Clayton. A little bit of relief for Sunday. The intensity of the heat wave diminishes some, but we will be breaking the record at Alamosa and another hot day there at Winslow. And even though records are not being broken at Phoenix and Tucson and Needles, it is still very hot, expecting 111 in the lower Colorado River Basin. And there's your sneak peek for Monday. Not much change. 109, tying the record at Phoenix, and same thing at Winslow, and some of that heat spreading out into the eastern U.S., Wallops Island, 89, tying the record for the date, and coming close to the record from Washington, D.C., down to North Carolina, and down to Charlotte and Augusta. Any hazards for today? Take a quick look at the map. We've got air quality alerts up in Montana and Oregon due to the wildfire smoke. Further south, red flag advisories for the wind and some special weather statements for the thunderstorm activity. And further south, excessive heat advisory for Arizona and the California deserts. And in the inland areas of the Los Angeles and San Diego areas, heat advisory, but we are expecting some showers. In fact, they're already underway on the mountains out to the east. There's a look at Southern California earlier today. You can see the orographic effects, cumulus bubbling on the higher elevations and developing into showers and storms. That's going to be just east of Riverside and well east of San Diego, almost in the desert regions. A broad view of Nevada, California, and Arizona shows numerous showers and storms. Obviously, we're getting some help from the upper levels, and likely some of the moisture from Arizona is working its way northwest. And then working our way up to the north, we get closer to the frontal zone. I don't know if you caught that comma cloud at the very beginning. Let me freeze that. Yeah, there it is. That's the south part of that comma cloud. So that's going to correspond to the frontal systems somewhere in there, distorted somewhat by the mountains, and lots of cells out ahead of it in the Great Basin area from Lovelock, Elko, all the way up to Boise. Some pretty impressive storms. And then moving further north, we get into the head of that comma cloud. That's going to be it right there. So that's going to be the interplay between the warm conveyor belt and the cold conveyor belt. Lots of vertical motion occurring there. And we find the deformation zone right in this area. You can kind of see where the cloud elements are spreading apart. And that's why we call it the deformation zone. If we plotted the streamlines, we would probably see something like that right there, with the flow moving around like that, spreading up to the north on the north side, and we get that kind of setup right there. On infrared imagery, yeah, now it definitely looks like a comet cloud. The colder elements, the higher cloud tops, the more well-developed vertical structures are showing up very well here. And going to the water vapor imagery, we can see the dry slot working across Mount Shasta up into eastern Oregon. A lot of the deeper lift out ahead of that dry slot. And then back in this region right here, that's where we're going to find the upper level low. That's going to be more convective in nature. A lot of cold core convection likely in that region. You get some shallow cumulonimbus and towering cumulus clouds, which tends to shut down as we get into evening. Elsewhere around the country, good grief, look at that smoke in the Dakotas. That's thick. I mean, that's typically what the image looks like towards sunset when the sun angles are low, but that's not the case. I mean, this is earlier in the afternoon, and it's looking very bulky and wouldn't want to be in the middle of that. A lot of that smoke also making it down into the southern plains. Yeah, it looks like the worst of it in the southern plains over Oklahoma down towards Abilene. Stormy in the Gulf with the tail end of that frontal system right through that region there. You can see the clear skies up north of the front, indicating the dry advection, the slightly cooler air. Obviously, 90s aren't very cool, but the overnight lows have actually been pretty cool. Some upper 50s and 60s. And as usual, lots of storms in Florida, but confined mostly to the eastern part of the state. Working up the East Coast, you can see the cold air advection, the cloud streets coming from the northwest, and interestingly, right at the very end, you can see that smoke just kind of emerge as it gets lit up from a low sun angle. That's what I was talking about just a minute ago. As you get the low sun angle, a lot of your smoke and haze and other pollution really stands out. In the northeast U.S. and New England, we get deeper into the cold air advection, coming straight out of Ontario and Quebec, and then moving further to the northeast. We pick up Hurricane Larry approaching down there at the bottom right. Let me freeze that. There it is, the bulk of the storm coming up from the south. Some spiral bands showing up off the coast of Nova Scotia, and then the main storm pulls out right there. We switch over to infrared imagery, and you can still see somewhat of a eye right there, about 300 miles south of Newfoundland. I don't think we have a very good sector for that. Yeah, that's probably not a bad one right there. Yep, it's still going. It would be very interesting to be in St. John's this evening and watch this roll by. Let's look at that forecast there. Wind warning, hurricane warning, tropical cyclone information statement. Maximum gusts at St. John's, 100 to 140 kilometers an hour. That's going to be 60 to about 100 miles an hour with higher gusts possible. Yeah, that looks bad. I know this kind of thing is not exactly uncommon there, but I would expect some damage there in St. John's. Top story at CBC, Newfoundland and Labrador. Basketball. Okay. I don't think I see the storm anywhere in there. Yeah, there it is. Low-ranking news item, I guess. And there's our other system up there in Manitoba, an early fall baroclinic system with strong cold air advection working on the backside. You can see how it's kind of divided into open cell cumulus out over Saskatchewan and closed cell stratocumulus further up north. Typically, that boundary between the two delineates the position of the jet stream. That's kind of a rule of thumb there. Yep, looks pretty close. Yeah, there's that jet moving right through central Saskatchewan and down into northern Minnesota. So let's look at that 500 millibar chart and see what's in store. The 500 millibar high centered just south of Alamosa. There's Olaf way down to the south. And that kind of follows the steering flow, kind of like that. Maybe, I don't think that's going to head up to Los Angeles, but it is heading northwest. A trough moving onshore into California right there, and then the jet segment. Well, there's one down to the south, and then the mainstream further up north, and there's another segment right in that area there. Going into the weekend, the high weakens and settles in over Texas, kind of broadens out into this wide subtropical ridge. South of there, we've got tropical easterly flow. North of there, we've got the prevailing westerlies. Not much change going into Tuesday. Strong trough up to the north, so yeah, that's significant if you live in that area. Some ridging moving across Alberta and Washington. Things progress very well up there. And this is interesting. What's this? Is that Olaf coming back? No, Olaf actually, you can see that moving south, and then some other cutoff low gets pulled in with the prevailing westerlies. So, yeah, that's something else. Anyway, no big changes over the next week. Just stormy in the northwest. And looks like some ridging starting to settle in across the East Coast. So going into next weekend, trough out to the west, ridge east. Oh yeah, that's going to be a pretty significant pattern right there. Look at that very strong jet. This is kind of a mid to late fall pattern. And we've got very low heights across British Columbia and Alberta. So I think we've got some cold weather moving in. Better look at those thicknesses. Yeah, not a whole lot going on initially. You can see that cold front move south on Tuesday, but things really tighten up in the Pacific Northwest. Look at that come together. Strong frontogenesis around Thursday and Friday. And we see the 540 decameter thickness line start to make an appearance around Alberta and off to Prince George, Prince Rupert. That's some very cold air locked up there in Canada, but it's not coming south. For one thing, strong southerly flow in the plains, and the other thing, it's being blocked somewhat by the Rockies and this next system coming on shore. So it would be nice if that cold air came down, but it's not looking like it. Maybe late in the period, but that could just be the cold bias from the GFS, since we're 240 hours out. But if that pans out, that looks like a nice fresh outbreak of cold air coming into the central and eastern U.S. and round 2 with some accompanying thunderstorm activity. And that's all I got for this edition of Forecast Lab. I want to thank you for joining. We'll see the Patreon supporters back on Monday and everybody else on Wednesday. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.